Hi everybody, I'm Girl Writes What, and this is part 3 of a series I'm doing on legal paternal surrender. The idea that a man should be allowed the right to consent or not to the obligations and responsibilities of parenthood. For those of you who may not have seen any of my videos before, I've already given my assessment of 2 arguments that are commonly used by opponents to the idea of legal paternal surrender. The responsibility of men, the equal responsibility of men to prevent pregnancy, and the rights of the child. Today, I'm going to tackle a really easy one I stumbled on just a week or two ago, which amounts to, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is virtually word for word, allowing men to opt out of the obligation of paternity will generate social conditions that will lead to an epidemic of single motherhood. What? Now, for anyone with any sense of logic or reason, I can probably stop right there. And frankly, lol, what is pretty much all the rebuttal such an absurd statement really deserves. But for the sake of everybody else, I'm going to spell things out just a little bit. This person's hypothesis, which he did not go on to explain, relies on one of 2 premises. Either a man's money is all it takes to turn a single mother into a non-single mother, or people in general who are forced to pay the entire cost of their choices are somehow more likely to make irresponsible or foolish ones rather than less. I think we can all agree a single mother is a single mother whether her income is derived entirely from her own endeavors or partly derived from government or the man who contributed DNA to her child. And I'm going to reiterate that motherhood is a choice for women, regardless of how a pregnancy happened, whether intentional or accidental, and no matter who bears the greater share of responsibility for causing that pregnancy, once a zygote exists, every single decision is now in the sole hands of the woman. The pregnancy occurs in her body, therefore only she is allowed to decide whether that pregnancy is carried to term or terminated. Only she is allowed to determine if the biological father will even know that child exists. Immediately after birth, the default assumption is one of maternal custody and maternal power of decision as to what will happen to that child, whether it will go home with her and she'll be responsible for it, or whether it will go to someone else. Therefore, only she has any real ability to decide whether that child will be adopted out or abandoned at a safe haven. Only she can decide if she's willing to take on the burdens of motherhood or whether those burdens are going to be somebody else's. Motherhood is a choice women make. It is a choice they make entirely based on what they want. If they don't want to be obligated to a child, they really don't need to be. And these days, it's a decision a woman makes knowing full well that the state will hold a man financially accountable for mitigating that decision and making the resulting burden less onerous to her. I'm going to speak really, really slowly now, for the logically impaired. When you make a decision less costly for the person making it, that person is more likely to make that decision. Marketers know this, credit card companies know this, banks know this, fast food outlets know this, addiction counselors know this. It's called enabling. Looking at addiction counseling, when you're trying to get someone off smack or coke or booze or whatever, because it's a poor decision for them to do that and it's harmful to them and to those around them and to society, what's the first thing a counselor will tell you to do? Stop enabling them. If that person asks you to cover their rent for the month because they just really need the money because they made the shitty decision to spend the rent money on crack, you're supposed to say no. You're supposed to say, I'm not going to finance your bad decisions and enable you to keep making those bad decisions. Now, I don't really think there's a whole lot of concrete reason at all for premarital sex or sexual promiscuity in women to be particularly stigmatized because single motherhood is avoidable for even the most enthusiastic of sluts. I mean, say what you will about emotional or psychological damage, sluts being poor risks for commitment, whatever the heck you want to talk about. What I'm saying is the primary practical reason for an expectation of chastity in unmarried women is entirely avoidable now. But right now, at a time in history when women have 99% plus control over their fertility and pregnancy is almost entirely avoidable, upwards of 60% of children born within relationships or outside of them are unplanned. Perhaps planned by mom or even dad, you never know, but not discussed, agreed upon, or timed as desired by both parents. and 40% of children are born to unmarried women. And this descent into an epidemic of unplanned pregnancies only accelerated in an era of paternity testing and ever more draconian child support enforcement measures that saw more and more men held financially accountable for what resulted from the mistake of ejaculating and contributing DNA to a child they never agreed to create. I got some news for you guys. We are living in a culture of single motherhood. Single motherhood is a poor decision almost every single time. It just is. It's harmful to the children raised by single mothers, it's harmful to the women themselves, and it's harmful to the rest of us when a much larger percentage of those children grow up to be burdens on rather than productive members of society. And I'm speaking as a single mother. Yet this is a decision we completely enable women to make. And there's a big difference between acceptance and encouragement. We laud single motherhood, even pedestalize it, and frame it as admirable. And I suppose it can be, when it's necessary, very admirable that a woman can do it on her own if her husband died or abandoned her, or if she fled an abuser and took on the whole burden of the children because that's what was best for those kids. But choosing single motherhood right from the get-go, there's really not a whole lot that's admirable about that if it derives from a completely avoidable accident. We have enormous government and social mechanisms in place now to enable single mothers to make it on their own. Medicaid, subsidized daycare, subsidized housing, maternity leave, tax benefits, welfare, social programs, food stamps, all of that. We all, every one of us, pay huge amounts of money to enable women to make choices that will inevitably harm society. It's a poor investment to begin with, and at the same time, enabling single motherhood only perpetuates the problem by encouraging more and more women to make this choice. We hold men who never wanted kids financially accountable for these poor decisions that are made solely by women. Again, enabling more women to see this as a viable option because they can rely on someone else to be forced to mitigate the consequences of decisions only they have any real power to make. And in addition to the economic costs and social problems generated by raising children in homes with only one parent, this epidemic of single motherhood only divides the genders and creates deep resentments and mistrust of women, however much we refuse to listen to it or allow it to be spoken, on the part of wary men who are terrified of being held accountable for decisions they are allowed no meaningful part in. When you enable poor decisions in a multitude of ways, you are only guaranteeing that more people will be making them. Women have every ability to behave responsibly when it comes to contraception and to put the well-being of children before their own when it comes to decisions like adoption. Why are we treating them like children themselves and bailing them out of the full consequences of unilateral decisions only they are allowed a say in, rather than telling them to woman up, own their decisions, and if they don't want to own those decisions, start exercising their sexual freedom responsibly so they won't have to make them? What on earth would make anyone believe that enabling irresponsible behavior will generate less of it? Should women be allowed to be single mothers? Sure. I mean, I am. Should we shame single mothers or treat their kids like crap? I'm not saying that either. But how much should the rest of society pay in order to make that decision as easy as possible for a woman to make, especially when you consider the harm it so often does to so many children, men, and to all of the rest of us? Anyhow, that's all I have to say about that particularly ridiculous, silly, absurd argument. And I must admit, it was pretty easy to demolish that one. So I'm gonna say bye for now, and maybe I'll do those dishes, or maybe not. See you later.